What's up, YouTube people, boxing fans, friends, and family of mine? What's good? Episode 28 of the Slip Away Podcast coming right at you, talking about Billy Joe Saunders and Martin Murray, recapping the entire fight card of Errol Spence and Danny Garcia. I'm going to talk briefly about Joshua-Pulev and a few other fights, so let's get right into it. Actual boxing, I read earlier this week that Floyd Mayweather has signed to fight an exhibition fight with Logan Paul, and this is going to be the only time I talk about this fight. Before, after, this is going to be the only time I talk about this fight, and this is what I'm going to say about it. Don't buy that fucking fight. Don't buy that fight, man. It's not a real fight. This is where the YouTube celebrity personality driven boxing can get dangerous, when you start trying to mix that and real boxing and trying to put these personalities and these people in with legitimate athletes. It's not only dangerous, but it's bad for the sport. It makes it so that all you have to do to fight the very best is to do things promotionally to cut the line, market yourself in a way where you can cut the line and cut out the hard work and cut out maybe having to lose some fights and getting beat up. And it's so disrespectful to all of the fighters who put in the work for years to get to that level, and then they often don't get the fights. So now you're going to tell me that you could be an 0-1 YouTube star and you could get a fight with Floyd Mayweather? Even if it's an exhibition, just the exposure of that. There's guys who hone their craft their entire lives, for 40 years of their life and never get that opportunity. So if you love this sport, man, if you love the integrity of the sport and you care about the best fighting the best and anything outside of that being bullshit, you know what I'm saying? Don't buy this fight. Just don't buy the fight, man. Just leave that shit be. Let that, make it so that though people putting those fights together feel like it's a bad business move. That's all you can do. Just don't buy the fight. And I'm going to leave it at that. You're never going to hear me talk about it again. The first card I want to talk about is Billy Joe Saunders getting a unanimous decision against Martin Murray. Murray's been a tough contender for a very long time. Good fights with Sturm, with Sergio Martinez. He gave Golovkin some nice rounds. He's been in with the best of the best. But I think he's 38 years old, and he looks at he's not like a Lara or a Rigondeaux. He's not a guy, or Golovkin, guys that are still fresh in that later part of their career. That's not him. He's had rough fights. He's coming off a layoff. It's probably harder to shake off that ring rust at that age. So it's not exclusively age, but it's age mixed with other circumstances. And Saunders, frankly, I think he's one of the very, very best at 168. And just showed a lot of nice variety in this fight. He was able to, the early part of the fight, be on the front foot. And interestingly, Murray had a nice little counter jab working. And I think that for the first 2 rounds, they kind of fought more on even terms. And then at some point, Billy Joe got up on his toes a little bit and started to box and mix up his approach, sometimes coming forward, sometimes being on the back foot and being slick, and he's a momentum fighter, a lot like Terrence Crawford in that way, where he's got that next gear and he's going to take you through the gears, you know what I mean? And he's going to keep moving up, and by the 5th or 6th round, if he's caught his rhythm, he's just kind of boxing circles around you, which is exactly what happened in this fight. The head movement and the elusiveness with the footwork is really incredible, and just his ability to adjust mid-fight, because this was a tough opponent, man. You know, there's world-class fighters that have had a hard time with this guy. So in my mind, I was like, look, if this is like another tough decision, makes sense. You know, it was a tough decision when he fought Sergio Martinez. So, you know, and Billy Joe every round just made that gap wider and wider and wider. And by the end of the fight was completely dominant. I thought they could have stopped that fight, you know, with it maybe in the 10th, the 9th or the 10th, the corner could have stopped it. But, you know, I also understand him wanting to finish the fight and do it on his terms and all that, you know. But for Billy Joe, you know, I would love to see him in a big fight next. I would love to see him against the winner of Canelo and Callum Smith, or David Benavidez, or Caleb Plant, or any of the many talented fighters of this weight class, you know, because his skill set and the number of things he can go to holds up against anybody at that weight. Anybody. He's as dynamic as anybody, you know, and he has that similar thing to Tyson Fury, where like he can do so many things that whatever it takes to win the fight, he will and can do. If he needs to come forward and be a little bit more of a bully, he has the skills to do that. If he has to exclusively be up on the back foot and be slick and maneuver the way he did against Lemieux, he can do that. Like, all of those options are within his tool belt. And that's what boxing is, right? It's like, who has the most tools? Who has the most things they can go to? And when this guy switched on, I think he has, you know, one of the fullest tool belts in the whole sport. And I think even, and that's the thing, is like, I want to see that tested against the very best, because it's only been tested against the very best a handful of times. You know, Eubank and Lemieux are really like the only two elite opponents that he's fought. You know, we want to see how that holds up against Golovkin, against Andrade, against Benavidez, all those guys that, you know, from 160 to 168. You know, we have to see those, and we got to see him now. I mean, he's in his prime. He's at his very best. He's still young. He's like 31. You know, now is the time. You know, and I honestly think the sky is the limit for this dude. He's a very talented guy. So I hope what's next for Billy Joe Saunders is a big fight. That's what I hope. Because I think he deserves it, honestly. I think he deserves it with that kind of performance. And on top of that, after the fight, he's critical of the performance. And he's like, my timing was off. And he's like kind of beating up on himself for winning basically every round. You know, that's the champion's mentality, where you can always get better. You can always do something else, you know. So that's what I hope for him. So Saturday was the big card with Errol Spence and Danny Garcia. Fucking a tremendous undercard. Also, I thought it was going to be a little bit soft going in, but it was actually really entertaining. My biggest issue with this card, similarly to the fight with Leo and Tank, was the size of the crowd. You know, at Leo and Tank, there were 10,000 people, most of them masked. At this fight, there was 16,000 people and half of them masked. You know, and again, aside from that, like, just being risky for people's health and not the best, like, personal decision to make, that's bad for boxing. You know, to make boxing look like it can't hold a responsible event, or that boxing is somehow exempt from having to follow safety protocols, because they're the only promoter doing this. PBC is the only promoter doing this. You know, PBC had a cut on that Tank Leo fight. You can see the logo, anything Showtime, anything Fox. You know, they're the only promoter really doing this. Even next week with Joshua-Pulev, which I'll get into later, they're having 1,000 people. That's their very first crowd, is 1,000 people. You know, here we're at the height of this fucking pandemic, and there's 16,000 people indoors at a boxing match. You know, most of them not wearing a mask. It's just the optics of that, and how that makes American sports look, and the risk that it puts for other people in the sport to make money. Like, you're fucking up everybody's money now. If people get to the point where boxing is just too risky, because look, I watched the fight on TV. There's no mask enforcement. There's none of that. That makes me want to go even less. If they wanted to market it so that, come to the fights. Like, we're taking this serious. We want you to feel safe here. They did not fucking accomplish that at all. They fucked that up royally. To the point where if there was a big fight sign and it was exclusively 2 PBC fighters in-house, I would have to look into whether or not there was a crowd. Because if it's pay-per-view, I had no interest in funding that kind of an event. And I didn't know. I didn't know that that's what I was funding. I didn't know that fucking all these world champions were going to have no masks and hugging and walking around and nobody's in their seat. And Fox even has the fucking balls to be like, oh, here's our COVID protocol for the night. We're really taking it serious. And then they flash out to the crowd and none of that shit is happening. I feel it's just like the last thing you want to do, like I said with the Leo Tank fight, the last thing you want to do is fuck the money up for everybody because short term you were like, no, I'm done not making the most money possible. We're doing it now regardless of the circumstances. Fuck that shit. Aside from that, it was a great event. It was a great night of boxing. Eduardo Ramirez getting the 5th round stoppage of Miguel Flores. I thought Ramirez looked like the total package. I thought he looked like a very aggressive but defensively responsible Mexican-style fighter. And with a lot of these featherweights, a lot of them have moved up in weight recently. Guys like Leo, perfect example. And, Tank Davis and some others, where featherweight is a little more up for grabs than it used to be. I think this guy's aggressive style and his hand speed and his confidence, that's really the big one too, is I've seen some of his earlier fights where he's a little less confident. I saw him lose to Claudio Morero. He just looks like he's got that belief, like he's got the sauce a little bit, you know what I mean? He's got that little extra swagger in his step. Like, when I hit you, you're going to feel it. Because you could see he had that mentality coming forward against Flores. And he's got 24 wins, 11 knockouts. It's not like he's a big puncher, but he has that mentality now of a killer. So I think anybody at featherweight Flores is dangerous. Absolutely. The second fight was Josecito Lopez winning, or actually he stopped Francisco Santana in the 10th round. Josecito Lopez been around forever, man. That dude's been around forever. And he's fought so many killers in his era and of the era before this, and he is still fresh and he's still getting better and he's still relevant. I mean, it's really kind of amazing, especially how he looked in the Thurman fight, that he is with Robert Garcia and his skills are this fine-tuned right now. I mean, I'm not saying he wasn't technical, but he was not this technical when he fought Canelo and when he fought Maidana and when he fought all of these top guys that he's been in with. His technical game, his ability to stay disciplined and box and the subtle parts of the game are so much better than I've seen them. He really does look like a rejuvenated fighter at 36. That's what I'm saying. Like, where boxing age is less about the number and more about how much punishment you take in and how you care for your body outside the ring. And he looks like a guy who's just in shape. He's just an in-shape dude who stays ready, and that's hard to do if you're not getting big fights or if you're not as active as you want to be. He's got that veterans record. He's 38-8 with 21 knockouts, and he's fought so many top guys. I don't think a win like this puts him at the elite level because Santana's sort of a fringe contender, but Santana's a tough dude. In theory, these two guys would be at a similar kind of level maybe, and and Lopez showed that that's not the case at all, that he's very much at a different level than somebody like Santana. And so to me, in my mind, now he's sort of in that shuffle of the lower half of the welterweight top 10. He's in that mix with Ugas and Jamal James and Abu Ramos and maybe even Danny Garcia and, Sean Porter, the guys that aren't the top of welterweight, you kind of have to put Lopez in that mix. Truthfully, I would love to see him and like a Louis Collazo, because he's another guy in his 30s that can still get it done, or Jamal James, or somebody else that's in the bottom part of that top 10 to really see where Lopez is at. Like, is he a feasible opponent potentially for the elite of the sport? Because I think the Keith fight shows that he is. He almost knocked Keith Thurman out. So, Josecito Lopez, I think, is ready for part 2 of his career. It's probably going to be a little shorter, but I think whatever comes next for him, he's going to be as equipped for it as he's ever been in his whole career. So, tremendous performance, particularly for a guy in his mid-30s. The last fight before the main event was the 6'6" junior middleweight Sebastian Fundora stopping Habib Ahmed in the second round. Fundora is like a little freaky, man. Being 6'6" and being at that weight class, regardless of who you're in with, you're going to look way bigger than them. The difference now is he's really learned how to fight tall. He's really learned how to keep, at least in this fight, he kept this guy right on the end of his punches the whole time, and he never fell in. Whereas anytime I've seen him before, he's way more inclined to fall in, to stay in the pocket too long, to take punches. And in my mind, I was like, this could be the thing that holds him back, is he doesn't understand how to use his size. And he keeps giving that up. And now he's taking punishment he doesn't need to take, purely because of his mentality and his style. In this fight, he kept this guy on the end of all his punches. His jab was much busier. It looked like the concept of fighting like a tall fighter clicked for him. Like, whoa, this makes this a lot easier. And maybe I can even get knockouts faster because I'm getting the full torque of all of my shots, And none of these guys I'm fighting are going to have that torque that I have, because none of them are 6'6". None of them have an 80-plus inch wingspan. You know what I mean? And I think if this guy can stay tall and long for the most part, I think the fact that he fought early in his career more on the inside will be an advantage, because if he's fighting somebody and he's fighting tall and for whatever reason they're slippery enough to get inside, he can handle himself. I think that makes him a more total package. And on top of that, I really feel like he's only going to move up in weight. And as he moves up in weight, I think he's going to get stronger and faster and sharper. I think he's just going to, and I could be wrong, we'll see. But I think this guy's got a lot of potential. I think for the height and the speed and the length, he's just going to get bigger and better. That's my take. And I think that could be soon. But, he's 22, 23 years old. He's got plenty of time. He's just getting going. He could easily be a light heavyweight before it's all said and done. We'll see. And then we had the main event. We had Errol Spence Jr. against Danny Garcia, getting a clear cut unanimous decision. I had the fight 116, 112, 117, 111, somewhere in there. And Errol Spence is back, man. It's a crazy epic comeback. That after that car accident, you see what that car looked like. You see what his face looked like. Just the fact that he can box, that he can train, and then the fact that a year later, 14 months later, whatever, he could fight at this level, that's an amazing comeback, man. That's, similar level to Danny Jacobs' comeback from cancer. It's not exactly the same, but it's pretty fucking epic, man. It's it's the best comeback since that's for sure. And I think the real way he's back is that the fight looked how I would have thought it looked pre-accident. You know what I mean? Like, if they signed this fight the day after the Porter fight, that's what I thought it would look like. Because Danny did his thing a little bit, you know. Danny, especially in the first half of the fight, was able to do some counterpunching, you know, and was landing hard body shots, occasionally landing kind of a looping right hand over the top. The problem for Danny at this level at welterweight is that he's not active enough. He's not active enough. He doesn't throw enough punches, man. He keeps his hands in his pockets for too long. He's a little too selective. He's just not busy enough. You know, his mentality is that of a counterpuncher. You know, his whole thinking, his whole mentality in the ring, his whole disposition is about trying to get you to make the first move, overcommit, I make you pay for it. The problem is if somebody's really smart like Errol and they can keep the fight at the end of their jab and they can stay busier and outwork you and not be as concerned about landing the shot or about, you know, blasting you with power on every single shot, you know, you can outbox that style. If that style is not willing, you know, because there was no point where Danny made Errol question whether or not he should let his jab go. There was no point, really, I felt like, where Errol was like, all right, I can't get off 2 or 3 right now, because the reality is Danny's coming back with 1. And he's always coming back with 1. And even if it's a good one, it's 1. So the at welterweight, at this level at welterweight, it's hard for Danny Garcia to get decisions because, yeah, he'll crack you and he's got good power, but he doesn't get a lot of knockouts because he's not busy enough and because it's at welterweight. You know, at junior welterweight, I think it was, you know, he had a little bit more fight-changing power. I still think he has fight-changing power. But at this level, against the very top 4 or 5 welterweights in the world, it's just not enough. It's enough to lose a decision, you know. So for Errol, you know, everything went right in this fight. He was active. He had great punch resistance. You know, when Danny did hit him, he took it well. You know, Danny landed hard body shots, man. The first half of the fight, Danny was cracking him with some body shots. Landed some good stuff upstairs. That looping right hand is always dangerous, but, you know, Errol just handled it all really well. And he's another guy where he's super patient and he knows the right moment to kind of bring a new energy or to change the game up. Okay, this is the round I start to box and I throw him off his game, or this is the round I get a little more aggressive and I catch him off balance with it, you know. I felt like Errol Spence was able to do what Errol Spence wanted. And that's partly because he's a great fighter and he's fully recovered himself from this fucking horrible accident. But it's also, I think, the opponent. I think the opponent is not, as much as Danny Garcia was a great opponent and an elite level welterweight, stylistically, this is not the style of fight that's going to test Errol's capacity physically, you know, unless he just gets clipped and put out or hurt. You know, the style of Danny, it's like you got 30, 40 punches around coming at you, you know, tops. So if you can withstand that and withstand the accuracy, you know, and weather that storm, he can be beat. And that's what Errol did. You know, as far as what's next for Errol, this is such an epic comeback that it's and such an epic comeback against such a great opponent, that it would not serve him to fight anybody other than Pacquiao or Crawford. If he's not fighting Pacquiao or Crawford, he better move up and weight. You know, I've seen the 3-fight plan and whatever. It's like, dude, if you're not going to fight Terrence Crawford or Manny Pacquiao or move up and weight, I don't care now. Because the thing is, him, Crawford, Pacquiao, they've separated themselves as a top 3, right? Terrence with the dominant win over Kell Brook. As long as Pacquiao's active, I think he's a top-level guy, and especially after the Thurman fight, you know, and Errol has separated himself. Those 3 guys have separated themselves. It doesn't necessarily serve any of them to fight somebody below that, except for Pacquiao. Pacquiao has nothing to prove. You know, Spence and Crawford ultimately are the 2 younger fighters with something to prove. And I think that they have to fight each other or they have to fight Manny. There's no other opponents for either of them that really matter, particularly for Spence, where, okay, now you fought Sean, you fought Danny, you know, other than Keith, there's no other top level welterweights at PBC for him to dance with. So it has to be Pacquiao. If they're going to keep it in-house, they have no choice but to do Spence and Pacquiao. Unless Pacquiao really doesn't want the fight, it seems like that's what they're going to do. Which I'm cool with, man. If he wanted to fight Manny Pacquiao and move up to junior middleweight, and that's how you were going to keep it in-house, not that I'm okay with it. I want to see him fight Crawford. But you couldn't say he's ducking Crawford if that's what he's doing. And Crawford hasn't proved himself against as many of the lower part of the top 10 the way that Spence has. He's fought Porter. He's fought Danny Garcia. He fought Kell Brook a couple of years ago. He's fought Lamont Peterson. Spence has been fighting top-level welterweights for a couple of years now, and Crawford really hasn't. So ultimately, and I'm not sophisticated enough in a business sense to know how this gets done, but I don't entirely see how. In my mind, it feels like it's on Crawford. It's on Crawford to make that push, or to make the appeal of the fight so great that there's no other fight worth making. And his body of work to me is just not there. I love the Kell Brook win. It's an elite level win, but that's kind of like a start. That shouldn't have been the first time he had to do that at welterweight. Shouldn't have been the first time. So ultimately, I hope that those two guys can put that fight together, because there's so often in boxing that there's a great fight that can be made that doesn't get made because they keep trying to build it, and they keep trying to build it, and they keep trying to build it, and then somebody loses or somebody gets hurt or whatever the case may be. A perfect example, Anthony Joshua and Deontay Wilder. How fucking quick did the zip come off of that fight? Joshua loses to Ruiz, and then Wilder loses to Fury. It's 2 years ago, everybody was talking about Wilder Joshua. I'm not saying that's not a good fight still, but it doesn't have the same zip because you kept taking risks and you kept putting both of these guys in with other top level heavyweights. It's that's how you get that shit ruined. I heard somewhere that, I don't remember where, but I heard somewhere that Errol was talking about fighting Keith Thurman. In my mind, that's a stupid fight to take, because that's a fight you could lose, and it doesn't have the same marketability or even prestige as a Crawford or a Pacquiao fight. So now you're putting your fighter in a position where they're taking risky fights, and what's the end game? Are you just giving them risky fights, or is there a buildup? And if there is a buildup, they need to make that more obvious and clear. This is part of a long-term plan to put these fights together. I don't want to see Spence and Thurman. I want to see it, but I don't want to see it now. I want to see it when it's at its most important. What's most important right now is Spence Crawford or Spence Pacquiao or Pacquiao Crawford. And whoever gets left out of that mix gets left out of that mix. It's what do you even say to them? They have to, and I don't know enough about the business and how exactly these things go down. But it just seems like somebody's got to move their fucking weight around to make this thing happen. And I don't know how that happens. But if he wanted to move up and fight, Charlo or Lara or one of these junior middleweights, Jarrett Hurd, I would love to see that too. But no more of anyone that's not an absolutely elite level fighter. It should only be big fights for this guy, because he has clearly separated himself as a pound for pound fighter. Last thing I want to talk about real quick is next weekend, Anthony Joshua is going to be fighting Kubrat Pulev. I believe this is a mandatory defense of his WBC title. I'm going to check that. I'm going to put it in the description of the video below. Is a mandatory for one of his belts, because obviously this is not necessarily the fight that we all want to see Anthony Joshua in, but tough fight, very credible opponent. Not a gimme, especially having watched the Ruiz fight, and we know especially at heavyweight that anything can happen. Povetkin knocking out Dillian White. The heavyweight division is much more of a we'll see, because guys have power at other weight classes, but at heavyweight, all of them have a certain amount of power. When you're that big, if you catch somebody clean one time, if anybody catches anybody clean one time, there's always a chance you put them out. And I think that Joshua is going to be a little too mobile and versatile and athletic for Pulev, who's a good fighter, but he's 39. I haven't really seen a whole lot of him outside of that Klitschko fight. I think I've seen him one or two other. I saw him against Chisora, and he fought a good fight against Chisora. But he doesn't seem like an explosive, fast, twitchy, athletic enough fighter to deal with Joshua. But we'll see. He might put the heat on. I'm going to go with Joshua by mid to late round stoppage. I think he's just going to be too much, and I think he sees bigger fights on the horizon as well, and he's a very focused guy, and hopefully after this, he can either get the Fury fight as soon as possible and we can have an undisputed heavyweight champion, or he takes that other mandatory of his IBF against Alexander Usyk, and I think that's a fucking great fight too. And if Joshua and Usyk were to fight, I think the winner of that fight, one of those two guys beating the other makes a fight with Fury that much more marketable. And it's a risky, difficult fight that's great for your legacy. So hopefully Joshua can get the W this weekend, and we can either get Joshua Usyk next or we can get Joshua Fury next. I think that's a win-win situation, particularly as the talent pool at heavyweight has grown and gotten better. I feel like we're finally narrowing down who the very top of the division is. Obviously, it's Fury at the moment, but it would only be solidified if he was able to beat Joshua. So hopefully they can put that fight together, and hopefully Joshua can get a nice win this weekend. But that's it, guys. That's episode 28 of the Slipping Week podcast. Appreciate you guys watching as always, and I'll catch you next week. Peace.